we haven't made any, we haven't gotten a grant in 2 years. I mean, it's been challenging. We just, our issue kind of falls right in the cracks between climate and tech funding. I didn't just find that and immediately quit. I went through years of trying to understand more about what was going on, who was in charge, how these decisions were being made, and what we could do internally to try to push as employees for positive change.
It's one of those trade-offs that you have with like sort of having shareholders and having being a publicly traded company and having a board, right? Is that the board is sort of external to the company itself, and they can sue you. They can sue you if they can make the argument that you've reduced their income by doing something unnecessary. And you could argue that this movement towards sustainability, they could argue it's unnecessary in a court, and they would probably win.
Certainly, creating a warm and engaging narrative for your podcast can set a great tone as a suggestion that combines an upbeat and inviting spirit without any background music. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, your go-to podcast from Tangelic, where we dive into the vibrant world of clean energy, development, sustainability, and climate change in Africa. We bring you inspiring stories, insightful discussions, and groundbreaking innovations from the continent making waves in the global community. Tune in and join the conversation toward a brighter, greener future. Let's get started.
Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of energy, equity, and empowerment with your co-hosts Victoria Cornelio and Andres Tamez. Today's episode, we're joined by Holly Alpine, co-founder of the Enabled Emissions Campaign, an initiative exposing one of climate action's biggest blind spots: how advanced technologies, cloud computing, and digital systems are actively accelerating fossil fuel production. Yikes, this is going to be a fun episode, guys. Before this, she spent over a decade at Microsoft, where she built a 10,000 plus member employee sustainability network and founded the Data Center Community Environmental Sustainability Program, shaping corporate sustainability investments at scale. Holly brings a rare insider-outsider perspective on what it takes to push the change inside big tech, which is a big topic this season, and what it costs to speak up. So Holly, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
How did you find yourself at this crossroad? We love intersection here. So how did these come together?
Yeah, I loved my job at Microsoft. I was at the company, as you mentioned, for almost a decade, or a little over a decade. And I had amazing colleagues, an amazing team, and amazing work that I was doing. I was working directly on sustainability projects, actually in the data center community team. So I was investing in sustainability projects in those communities where Microsoft hosts their data centers around the world, and also was, as you mentioned, working with thousands and thousands of amazing employees on our sustainability community. So that part was all wonderful. What I found increasingly disturbing, though, and what I found at the company that ultimately led me on a very different path, was the contracts and partnerships that my company, Microsoft, was having with oil and gas companies to help those companies find and produce and refine and transport, and basically every step of the value chain, more oil and gas more quickly and more cheaply. And that really went against everything that I believed in the company to be as a sustainability leader, and everything that my fellow employees stood for as well. So that led me on a very different journey from there.
Yeah. And did that lead you to co-founding Enabled Emissions Campaign?
Eventually, yeah, but first, I didn't just find that and immediately quit. I went through years of trying to understand more about what was going on, who was in charge, how these decisions were being made, and what we could do internally to try to push as employees for positive change. We worked within a coalition of employees at the company for about 4 or 5 years, working directly with senior leadership to work very coordinated within the company, very collaboratively, on how we could put internal guardrails in place. And we seemed to be making headway, but ultimately we really realized that internal pressure alone was not going to be enough. And we ultimately decided that we needed to have some sort of external force. We think the internal and external pushing together is what's really going to make change, and there just really was no external force. So we decided to be that, and to be that force, and quit our cushy tech jobs to be nonprofit founders, which was very different life path. And when I say we, this is my partner and I. He's both my partner in life and in this work. And we bring very complementary skills. And we were both at Microsoft. We didn't meet at Microsoft,
Right.
but we met in the mountains. But we were working on this together, and both decided to leave and do this together.
That's amazing.
Ah, that's awesome. Do you just like as an outsider, right? Speculating is the was one of the like factors that to as to why Microsoft couldn't stop sort of getting in bed with these things that are just not coherent with your values, just like the accelerationism and the growth at any cost. Like it's just the infinite growth model, basically, that pushes them to we need
Yeah,
energy now. We
yeah,
can't think forward. Is that essentially what the big reason for them to just not stop using oil or
yeah.
like, mhm.
Yeah, and I mean, I can only speculate. When we talked with the senior leadership, they completely agreed with us that there should be guardrails in place, that using this technology to dramatically increase global fossil fuel production and resulting emissions was the exact opposite of what the company should be doing. And Microsoft is very strongly supportive of climate science and of guardrails and of the need for any company who can move faster should. Like, they have very beautiful and strong quotes around the responsibility of companies to do the right thing for our planet and everything and everyone who lives on it. So I can't really tell you though then what happened once after those meetings, when they went back to the rest of the leadership team and the board of directors, that ultimately, I keep using that word ultimately, but it was a lot of a lot of process that ended in there not being the change that they had promised and that they said that they needed. So, I mean, I feel for them, because there is the fiduciary duty argument of having value for shareholders above all else. There's quarterly profit that they have to report on, and these contracts were extremely profitable and are extremely profitable, and so they're kind of in a tough spot if they are taking that quarterly profit approach and not wanting to have their doing the right thing in any way, shape, or form threaten that.
Yeah.
I guess it's one of those trade-offs that you have with like the sort of having shareholders and having being a publicly traded company and having a board, right? Is that the board is sort of external to the company itself, and they can sue you. They can sue you if they can make the argument that you've reduced their income by doing something unnecessary. And you could argue that this movement towards sustainability, they could argue it's unnecessary in a court, and they would probably win.
Yeah, yeah, which is why I'm very excited to see some movements around fiduciary duty and kind of
Yeah.
stakeholder value being more stakeholders rather than shareholders, where stakeholders also
Mhm.
includes our planet, and the way that
Yeah.
humans can live on this earth is that is a part of a stake of what should be counted in how a company is evaluated. So I'm very excited for that
Oh,
movement, because
is
that
that like a real movement that's actually like gaining traction? Because this is something that I would be very very excited about. If the stakeholder also counted like just the world, in the environment.
yeah, yeah, I don't know as much as I should about the movement. I mean, I know I've seen it brought up, and there's I think organizations that are trying to push for it, but I don't actually really know where that is. Maybe that's something we should um, look into and share in the podcast notes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's one of the reasons that ESG has taken over CSR. you know, that social governance part of things, including it in the environmental disclosures and things. It's meant to be that of we're taking care of both the environmental, planet, physical world, but also social communities, individuals, stakeholders. It's a simple semantics change, but it's also, it means everything when you bring it down to the legislations.
Yes, which so I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that we want to do in our campaign, and so just I guess a little bit backing up, when we decided to leave the company about 2 years ago, so in 2024, beginning of 2024, we decided to leave to found this campaign, and we have been now trying to pull many different levers from now this external position, and we still stand in solidarity and support the folks who and employees who are still within the company, both Microsoft and other tech companies within the fossil fuel companies as well. They are a little bit have their hands tied more than ever. The employees that are still in the company, just due to unfortunately, AI now is impacting, and it's not just AI, but the employment of these people is
Mm.
more at risk than ever. We've had tens of thousands of layoffs, even just in the Seattle area, and people are quite nervous and
Yeah.
scared for their jobs, and less willing than ever to speak out because they will not have a job anymore, and it is a very hard job market right now in tech. So that said, now we've been working externally for change and trying to pull many different levers, and one of them is around the ESG angle because Microsoft is one of the largest ESG companies on the planet. They were named number one ESG company in the world a few
Mhm.
Quote
years
unquote, I
ago.
would say, but yeah.
Which was that?
Quote unquote, I would
Yeah,
say.
right. I mean, but that's been there. They've been
Yeah,
chosen as that company, and
Yeah.
that's the
it's
brand.
because it's because for some reason with tech companies, the way that they are evaluated for their environmental impact has nothing to do with what they're actually producing. It's only their own internal operations. So looking at
Hmm.
their own office buildings or in their supply chain, and it doesn't include what they
What?
produce, which is very odd because we don't let other companies and other industries get away with that. The example that I've brought up recently is around a company like Lockheed Martin, who's making weapons. You
Mhm.
would never judge the impact, their kind of violence footprint, just on their own HR practices and
Yeah.
how they're performing internally to the company. It matters what they're producing weapons. And
Yeah,
I
I
think
know.
that this is a good analogy to tech companies. We we would never call Lockheed Martin a company of peace because we take into consideration what they're producing. Yet companies like Microsoft and tech companies, we call them a company of sustainability because we're only looking at their internal practices and we're not counting what they're producing, which is technology for fossil fuel companies that is increasing global emissions at a very large scale.
You mentioned that you worked with the sort in sort of like the sustainability space but along the lines of like their data centers, right? And all of that. What has there been a change in the philosophy around data centers? Because it seems to me like data centers are popping up
Mhm.
like they're
Everywhere.
spawning places.
Yeah.
And without rhyme or reason, wherever they can finally get people to just say yes, and without consideration. And there's a complete, like, a lot of executives I feel live in la la land, and they're in complete denial of the outward effects, because like they're like, because they'll bring a lot of arguments, like Google and Microsoft OpenAI were making a lot of arguments of like the jobs it'll produce, but then when they brought it there, they usually hired external contractors, and after it's built there are no jobs for the locals, right? So can you bring us through like what has changed in the space and what you think is like going on there? Because the data center thing, we've had conversations before on the podcast, and I feel like we need a more rounded view on it. Hmm?
And I can definitely speak to that up until 2 years ago when I left. And so, and I've kept in touch somewhat with folks on that team and in that space. But And just to preface this too with how they are two separate issues around the data centers and the energy, the infrastructure to and the operations to run the technology, and then what the tech is used for are just to be totally clear here. I know we have two topics then we're talking about on this in this episode. So what we've been talking about so far is what the technology is used for, which is what my campaign is around. But I did used to work on the data center team. And so there were considerations when choosing siting for the data centers around local considerations and um, how can we have the least impact, negative impact on the local communities with building the data centers. I would say though, there were a lot of other factors around siting, around how to making sure that you can get energy in that space or in that area, water, land, how cheap is the land, and there were a lot of factors to consider, and I would say to say it politically, a lot of those other factors maybe were higher on the list than local community impacts. There are great programs within Microsoft. The capacity is there, the brain power is there to kind of do it right. Whether the political will and the funding is there is another question, because when Microsoft and these tech and AI companies are selling this technology at a rate that is just, they are tripping on their own processes just to try to get the data centers built at a pace that can keep up with what they are selling. And so unfortunately, when you're trying to move that quickly and at that scale, you can't include all of these considerations that are possible. Like Microsoft has an amazing program around biomimicry, which is looking at how that data center can replicate local ecosystems and actually produce ecosystem services at the same or even more than a local reference ecosystem. So say you're and it's locally dependent. So depending on what
Mhm.
kind of ecosystem you're near, it kind of tries to mimic that in the amount of even fresh water it produces or carbon it sequesters. And so they have that program. It's just, is it getting funded at the
Yeah.
scale necessary? And then one more thing is about the jobs. Yeah, it data centers do not bring that many jobs. They're good jobs, but it's very few. And then, yeah, as you said, they do have some contracting jobs to build the data centers, but they're pretty short. Only a couple years at most. Um, so that argument, I don't think they really try to make that argument anymore.
Yeah, the blindfolds off, to be honest.
And then what my program was, just quickly, the I was on the community team. This did not have to do with the impacts of the data center itself. My community development or community affairs team was just trying to listen to the local community and then
Mhm.
fund local projects based on those local needs. And
Yeah.
so that's what I started that program for sustainability and developed it over many years. And I actually think, not to toot my own horn too much, but it had great principles, and I think it was a great program. My concern was it didn't have enough funding. It did not have nearly
Yeah.
enough funding. I mean, and it wasn't tied to the growth. It was just kind of a
Mhm.
set amount every year. I think it should have been tied to, like, how big is this data center? Can we have some percentage of revenue or construction budget that goes to the local community and that can actually fund these larger, like, really impactful projects? And then the other thing, was that I was just increasingly concerned that that program was being used to then justify increased data center expansion, and I wasn't completely convinced
Mhm.
that the good that I was doing was outweighing the harm and
Yeah.
kind of what that net. I was actually concerned that my work being used to justify ultimately led to negative impact on
Yeah.
the community.
Now they can say, yes, we're doing these things, but we're giving back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, but what's the scale of
Yeah.
each?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's one of those catch-22s when you're in this sort of space, right? The trade-offs that Andres was talking about, but also put your money where your mouth is. And if you're not getting the funding, then probably your interest and your priorities aren't necessarily there, which is why you're not putting money aside or creating a self sustaining program that gets
Yeah.
funded because of the things you're doing, right?
Yes,
Speculation on
and
my end.
yeah, and there are a lot of groups doing data center pushback right now. They're like shout out to those groups who are on the ground in lots of places around the world who are calling out the energy usage and the water usage and like just pushing these companies to have real meaningful um investments
Yeah,
and slow down and like don't just build without without the
yeah,
proper
with no
guardrails.
plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's great. And I'm glad that that's happening. Our work though gets my concern with this is that when people think about AI and energy, that is the data centers are definitely a concern. My concern is that that is the only thing that people see as
Right.
the environmental impacts of AI, but it's not. And
Okay, so
actually, if
I
we're
want to get
not,
into that. I just
yeah,
want
I mean,
I want you to define for us what enabled emissions is, because I'm really interested in the semantics of why your campaign is called that, and then let's get into the enabled emissions.
yeah. So we're not actually addressing AI's environmental impact. If we only talk about the electricity and water use of data centers, we have to talk about what the technology is built to do. And advanced technologies are actively being developed over the last decade and now with AI and generative AI are just supercharging these processes to develop to optimize and expand fossil fuel production. It's being used to lower their costs, increase the output, and really lock in decades of additional emissions that far outweigh the energy used to run the models. And these are additional emissions that would not happen if not for this technology. And that's why we're calling them enabled emissions. They're emissions enabled by the technology. We have many examples of projects that would not happen, and we have very clear quotes from energy executives saying there were these projects that were too expensive or too complicated to develop. And now with AI, these super powerful tools, we are now able to move forward with these projects. These are new offshore projects. These are new projects in the ocean subfloor. This is very like complicated projects, or even bringing back fracking. There are stories too around shale projects that we're bringing that back where it was being phased out because it just didn't make sense anymore. Now we can continue, and it's just like bending the curve back towards fossil energy, which is the horrifying.
I can feel Victoria's pain because, from what I understand, with
Plug
her
the
perspective,
machine.
one of the because I'm very anti. I run my local models. I don't use anything else, but I'm very anti big data centers, and I'm not. I don't like the way AI is going. But one of the silver linings, for example, for Victoria was the use of AI for better models around the environment and sustainability. But if it's completely contrasted or even dwarfed by its use for extraction,
Yes.
I'm
then
so
there's no
frustrated.
Yeah.
point.
This is the
Yes.
thing,
And
right?
so,
I think humans, we create very cool tools.
mhm,
It's all about how we employ them. So one of the things
exactly.
I've said
Well
before is
said.
AI would be great for us to figure out how much power the grid needs so we can roll out clean energy in the way that makes sense for the grid.
Yeah. There are absolutely fantastic applications of AI for sustainability, like full stop. It can be used for great things. The problem is we cannot only look at one side of the equation.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like it's like watching a game of basketball and you say, "Oh, yay, my team is winning," but you're only looking at your team's points.
Yeah.
And you have to look at how many points the other team has as well. So the sustainability side has 10 points, yay, but the fossil fuel side has a billion points. Then like clearly they're winning. We're just not even including that in the conversation. And there's this false narrative and false equation that even sustainability professionals around the world are talking about every day. It's very frustrating to me to see this false equation of being, we need to look at the positive use cases of AI for sustainability and the emissions that that could reduce, and but we need to look at the net equation of that versus
Yeah.
operations and the energy used to run the technology. It's like
Yeah.
you're missing the other side of the equation. Like, we should look at AI for good versus AI for bad in terms of emissions. Look at that, and then we can add the operations and the energy to run the tech, but that's a separate issue. But yet somehow they've been like, and
You
that
for
is what
Yeah.
people think the issue is,
We're
and they're
stuck in
you
the
missing.
forgot the
trying to
part.
break even.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we can try to break even, but we need to include AI for fossil fuels as well. If you're counting AI for renewables, you need to count AI for fossil fuels. Yet somehow that is in almost entirely left out of the conversation around climate and AI. I see it every day.
I think you can make the argument that a lot of more development time and mental power is being put into using AI for extraction than it is using AI for
Far more, far, far, far more. I mean, the contracts that we saw at Microsoft, it's kind of laughable, the comparison and the ratio of AI for sustainability versus AI for fossil fuels. Yet, and we're actually, that is why we take issue with things like Microsoft's external reporting with their 10K, their annual report, their impact summary, et cetera, that bring up their applications of AI and energy and only talk about AI for sustainability, which is a tiny fraction of what their AI is being used to do in energy. So we find that actually misleading. To shareholders and to employees and to the public. So that is something that our campaign is trying to do, is bring that to light of that um, actual ratio.
Okay. Do you think people don't know this because of a disclosure issue, a governance issue? Is it just a moral problem and we're all corrupt? Like, why don't people know?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that I think about all the time. Of like, how do people not know this? I mean, I think that these companies have done a fantastic job of keeping it quiet. They did have press releases back around 2019. You can see some very blatant press releases that I'll share with you between Microsoft and Exxon quantifying the barrels of oil per day. They were said, we are now able to, in the Permian Basin, produce 50,000 additional barrels per day that we would not have been able to produce without this Microsoft technology. And it was very blatant. And that was back in 2019. The technology has gotten way more advanced since then. And that's just one deal. But then when Microsoft published their sustainability commitments in 2020 around carbon, water, waste, and ecosystems, those press releases went away and they have not published publicly. They really have not spoken publicly about this work and have done a really good job of marketing and communications around their sustainability efforts. So I don't blame people for not knowing. um, I also think that this data center issue has just taken up the air time
Yeah.
around, like, that is the problem, and then our issue kind of gets it gets confused with that, and very common misconception that that's what we're talking about, even though it's a completely different issue. And I actually think that the tech and the fossil fuel companies are loving that everyone is focused on data centers, because they're
Yeah.
just getting away with it and getting away with this far, far larger. I don't want to pit them against each other. I don't want to say that we shouldn't focus on data centers because this is more important. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's just it should be both. And data
Yeah.
centers are like a piece of it.
Hmm.
It's just not the only thing.
Yeah. It's tip of the iceberg.
Tip of the iceberg. So that's our analogy. Yeah, that's what we say. Or one other, we've got a couple analogies. One is the data centers are the tip of the iceberg when we're talking about the full impacts. Another one is that data centers are like the lighter. And we're worried about the emissions from a lighter, which
Yeah.
we should be, but then what is the lighter being used for? And if it's being
Mhm.
used to light a forest fire, we should also care about the forest fire, even if it
Yeah.
ends up being an electric lighter
Yeah.
that's run on clean energy. If it's lighting a forest fire, that's still bad. Or one
Which it
more
isn't.
is that it's not.
Yeah, it's also
And
not
then
an electric
one
one.
other last analogy is around, we say we're building a robot, and even if the robot ran completely on clean energy, it had an amazing supply chain that would use green steel and everything, if the robot has machine guns, that's still we still need to address what the robot is being built to do.
I guess on a personal level for you, what does it cost, whether professionally or personally, I guess, to raise these issues publicly? Because you're very passionate, but also you come from being right there where change should have happened and leaving because you didn't see enough change happen.
I mean, I don't think I'm going to work at Microsoft anymore, which um is a little sad in a way, because working in tech and being inside the tent, as they say, definitely has benefits, in terms of the networks that you have, the colleagues that you work with, and the salary is not bad, and the benefits and everything. But I couldn't be part of that anymore, knowing what I know. And there's definitely a cost to that. We haven't gotten a grant in 2 years. I mean, it's been challenging. We just, our issue kind of falls right in the cracks between climate and tech funding. We're trying to bridge that gap, and we're definitely making headway. We've had fantastic coverage of the issue. We have a long ways to go, but we have been covered by a lot of great outlets. So that part's going really well, and that part feels really good. But it definitely is a cost to speaking out, and um, it's definitely tough. But
Hmm.
also, it also feels really good that I don't have any cognitive dissonance. I don't go to work every day like
Yeah.
feeling conflicted. I'm doing exactly what I think needs to be done. The conflict that I feel is like, where do I put my time and energy? What's going to have
Hmm.
actually make an impact? That's the biggest stressor, and like
Yeah.
just the financial part of it. But
Which is such a big I mean, with this whole AI boom, right? You can go at it from every angles. I feel like this might be like a good thing, but AI is sort of waging a war on like against all fronts. Because like, for example, you just mentioned the conflict of like, where do I put my time, right? And when I look at these issues, I think a lot about like consumer issues, right? How these data centers are hogging a lot of resources, how they're risking jobs. But then you can look at it from the energy perspective, and then you can look at it from the output perspective. And so, like, I feel like, and in the United States, I think there's been a lot of movements to just get this to stop, and they have done something, which is good. They have stopped the build. They have stopped expansion at multiple locations where they wanted to build data centers. But I don't think. I think like just deciding where you're gonna put your energy at this point in time is just almost impossible.
yeah, and that's very true. It's kind of good, I guess, that there are so many issues with AI, because then it's almost like everyone has a reason to be concerned. And so people are starting to kind of get it that this should have additional scrutiny. And I'm not someone who says that we need to stop all AI production or even stop all fossil fuels. I think there's a role, um, especially in places that don't have the infrastructure to do anything else. I am not someone who says we need to stop all fossil fuel production immediately. I just think we should have reasonable principles and guardrails. Just, I mean, and I know we're over time here, but
No, no, you're good.
I mean, there are there and even Microsoft has responsible AI principles for that try to mitigate human harms, and they're fantastic. They just don't include environment. So one
Mhm.
of the things that we're trying to do is just ensure that there's reasonable guardrails.
Yeah.
Um,
You want balance and transparency, which should
Balance and
be
transparency
obvious.
and responsibility, especially from a company who is speaks so strongly about responsibility, the responsibility that they
Yeah.
have as a technology company to take responsibility for the impacts of their technology. I just want them to follow through.
Yeah, be more congruent with the messaging. I guess where is your energy now? Plug us. What should we be looking out for? What do you want us to do? What's the CTA here?
Yeah. So most public conversations focus, as we've talked about, on AI's hypothetical climate benefits or its energy use. So, and very few focus on how it's actively expanding fossil fuel production today. So again, this isn't about banning AI, but it's about setting boundaries about what we allow advanced technology to scale. And so our campaign is partially just about bringing that part of what AI is used for into the conversation and into the responsibility and kind of ownership of the boundaries around AI's impacts. So one of the things we're trying to do is one is quantify and kind of look at the research. How can we quantify these emissions or kind of actually put some numbers and some research to this issue, because right now we can just say like it's really big, we promise, but how can we actually have some credible evidence behind it, and then how can we translate that into policy and into rules of the road. How can we actually have guardrails in place that are not just for company by company, but maybe raising the floor for the entire sector? So that's one thing we're trying to do. We think in the US in the next few years is going to be very, very difficult, but we're focused on the EU, who have things like the EU's AI Act that has certain applications of AI are flagged as high risk and go through additional scrutiny. And how can we build a coalition in this space with different tech organizations, climate, and even then just the civic society, general public, to try to show that it's important and that these companies should take responsibility. So we got a lot of different levers we're pulling. I would say to wrap this up, enabledemissions.com has a lot more information. And then there's a sign up link there for our newsletter. We very infrequently send, but we will send maybe once a quarter or even just twice a year with updates and some things that people can do to get involved.
Perfect. And we're going to put some of those resources on the blog as well. So we're going to stay for a bit longer, talk about more about the ethical questions. Let's get a bit meta here, a bit philosophical. Thank you so much, Holly, for being so open. I really appreciate your passion and transparency without doom. I think it's hard to be so candid without fear mongering these days. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fear too,
Yeah,
but
there's a lot to fear.
also some hope. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can check out the blog at tangeliclife.org, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye.
Let's talk power, let's talk change. From rural lights to brighter days. Equity rising, voices strong. We're building tomorrow where we all belong. Tangelic Talks, energy, equity, pride. Empowering the world, side by side. A spark becomes a fire, a vision that's true. Together we rise, it starts with you.